Robin Zander, scene A1.
Hello and welcome back to Snafu. I'm Robin Zander, and today's guest is Jeff Jaworski, a veteran salesman across a variety of different industries, but most recently for 15 years as an executive at Google. And now as a coach, we discuss what he does to coach executives on how to be better salespeople, and also what salespeople can learn from the skill set and attitudes of coaching. We talk about what Jeff is doing to instill the skills of sales in his own children, and what other durable skills matter most in the modern world of work. I hope you enjoy this wide-ranging conversation about sales and executive development and coaching, and also about what all of us can do to survive in this wild and crazy world we find ourselves in, with my friend and speaker at the Snafu conference, Jeff Jaworski. A quick note before we jump into the interview, and that is the Snafu conference. Jeff is going to be on stage. It is March 5th, 2026, here in the San Francisco Bay Area at the Oakland Museum of California. This is a one-day conference for reluctant salespeople, for bootstrapped entrepreneurs, founders, freelancers, consultants, anybody who needs to learn the skill of sales and self-promotion and speaking up so their voice can be heard, but isn't quite comfortable getting started. This is the conference for you. It's the first time we've put this conference on, but I have a 10-year track record of running incredible events, Responsive Conference being our flagship. And I would love to see you at the Snafu conference on March 5th at the Oakland Museum of California. If you want to learn more, you can go to joinsnafu.com to see more about our speakers and the event. Now, into the interview. Jeff, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Really appreciate you having me. Looking forward to it.
Likewise. You said that this was your last professional, or maybe it's me, so professional meeting of the day. And I'm so excited to sit down with you. But after this, you're going to go pick up your kids and make gingerbread houses.
That's right. Yeah. Kid pick up from school after this to drop off their stuff and then go back to school actually and go make gingerbread houses. So, nice holiday crafting activity after our time together.
As I was digging into your background, which we're going to go into in depth, one of the things that struck me again and again was your use of boundaries. And so we'll see if I succeed at this or not. But my goal is to kind of zoom in and zoom out on this topic of boundaries for a little bit as it applies in your career, in your life, and also in successful sales and maybe non-sales selling. So talk to me, if you will, about a couple of the transition points in your career where boundaries and even your kids helped you decide what you were going to be focusing on professionally.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such a great and big question to start with. So let's jump into that. I mean, if I think about boundaries, and this is going to get a bit into like kind of a career thought process, if you will, and we'll see where it goes. But I think I actually go all the way back to after I graduated high school. And I promise we're going to get to current day pretty quickly. I promise it won't be the whole hour. But when I think back to all the way up to high school, right? And I was very fortunate to live in a nuclear family, kind of very structured, very linear, decisions made for you, right? You know what times you go to classes, things of that nature. And then when I graduated high school, that was like the first time I had to make a decision for myself, right? And decided to go to college, because that's the next thing you're supposed to do, right? Go to college. And back then, my dream job actually was to be an ESPN sports anchor. I wanted to be like Stuart Scott, and cool as the other side of the pillow and all that fun stuff, right? So I go to college with a, television broadcasting major, if you will. Didn't do a whole lot of research, start doing the classes, et cetera. And I was like, I should really look into like what the job placement rate is going to be for this major. And the answer was 3%. And that was the first time, thinking about boundaries and the question you just asked, I said, okay, like, is this really the best use of my time? My parents were also paying for part of my college at that point. And the answer was no, right? Like I kind of came to this realization of like, this isn't the right move or step logically for me. And I had to set that first boundary of like, what's important to me? How important is it to be Stuart Scott versus like do the logical stuff, right? So I remember, shortly thereafter, I actually chose to completely drop out of college. And when I made that decision, it's actually what launched my career in sales. And I would have never realized it because at that point, I was also working at Best Buy, frontline salesperson, selling computers, selling service plans, and all those things. And when I dropped out, the manager of the store actually found out and approached me, and he was like, "Hey, I heard you may have more capacity. Would you be interested in running our home office department, running the biggest sales part of the store?" And I was like, "Patrick, sure, I'll do this, but this is temporary. I'm going to go back to school, da da da." I accept it and become the youngest supervisor in the company at 19. And that was what launched my first kind of passion.
Global. Like the youngest in Best Buy Global.
The youngest in Best Buy Global, yes.
Okay.
So, and that came with different things. I had people much older than me give me a hard time about how young I was and stuff like that. And being invited to a bar on purpose because they knew I couldn't go in because I wasn't 21. Things like that. But that's actually what launched that first boundary setting decision, then moved me into kind of the next thing that I started to feel some passion around. And as I moved up the chain at Best Buy, I got back into another boundary setting moment, which was I started to realize as I had success there that what the managers were doing, 60 hours, not a lot of boundaries, eating lunch out of the vending machine, things of that nature, was not what I wanted forever, or that's not the next thing that I necessarily wanted. And it got to a new boundary point, which I said, okay, now I know what I want to do, what I enjoy. I love sales. And that's when I decided to go back to college. And I went back to school to get a sales and marketing degree. I wanted to catch up quickly. I graduated in 3 years and then was offered an internship at J. Walter Thompson. And that's really like what launched my kind of sales and marketing career. But at every step, I've always kind of checked myself on the boundary really being, have I maximized this experience? Have I gotten everything out of this experience I wanted to get out of it? And when that experience is kind of proverbially like run its course, I'm always thinking and mapping out like, what's the next move, right? To set the next boundary line. And in some cases, it actually is like, I go like this, you hit a boundary point and you might have to come down a little bit, right? To like get a new experience, like, being in a senior position at Best Buy, then preparing me to be a manager and all that, and then deciding to take a demotion to go back to school is kind of like this. But then it brings you up that next mountain. So more to the story that gets me all the way to where I am today. But I would say I'll just maybe pause and see what comes up for you just so far when it relates to kind of boundaries and how I think about it.
Well, we'll come to it because you have kids. I don't yet. But I'm fascinated by skills that train other skills. And of course, sales is one of those. I think a lot about, okay, I think everyone should learn to surf because then you get comfortable swimming and also comfortable handling forces that are much stronger than yours. I think that most people, whether it's a lemonade stand or selling Cutco knives door to door, there's a usefulness. For me, it was selling pumpkins at Robin's Pumpkin Patch, practicing pitching, practicing asking, practicing approaching strangers when you're young. But I've never considered working at Best Buy as a job that teaches you some of those both customer service skills, which are universally applicable and humbling, and sales skills, and dealing with irritated customers because the sale that they saw online isn't relevant today. The other thing, and I feel like my career is maybe less strategic than yours, but I get bored past a certain point and then just throw in the towel, quit, and like find myself doing something else. It is not nearly as plotted out as you just described. But when I sold my restaurant, Robin's Cafe, on Craigslist in 2018, it was, I'm done with this. It was a good career move while I did it. It was a profitable enterprise. I sold it. I walked away. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I hit a point where I was done learning. I knew the next step, which was to open up multiple restaurants. I decided I didn't want to do that. And so move on to the next thing, not knowing what the next thing was. I think yours is perhaps a little bit more of a strategic approach, right? Of like, okay, I've maximized my learning here. What's next? And then move into that next thing. But I think that that's like just a very interesting, I have an echo of that, and I appreciate that approach.
Yeah, there's a little bit of like, so you might be giving me a little too much credit, but here's how I think about it, right? So you and I are aligned in when I'm no longer learning and growing, and this sounds dramatic, but if I'm not learning, I'm dying. That's how I feel, right? Like I'm not a maintainer, I'm a builder. Like I like to build things, I like the challenge, things of that nature. And I do have a sense of, things can kind of like run their course. And the sooner like what that runway might look like, then you can start to think through the next thing. So I have so many people come up to me, or talk to me and ask me how to think about these things. And I always tell them my biggest piece of advice to you is to build a bridge. Like a lot of times people don't know what the next thing is, right? They just know this isn't not the thing I want to do anymore, or are in the market we live in today, unfortunately, decisions made for them. And then they just don't know, like, okay, like, what am I going to do next? I don't actually know.
Yeah.
So for me, I always think about like, build the bridge, right? It gives you a better sense of like, what are some skills I want to learn? What are some experiences I want to try out? What are some experiments I can leverage in a lower risk environment that helps walk you towards what the thing, it gives you more clarity to what's on the other side. And then no different than a bridge, you have some pillars, you have some milestones that you're just kind of walking your way towards that thing versus, taking the proverbial leap where it's literally like, okay, like I jumped. I don't know if I'm going to land on the rocks in the ocean. I don't know what's on the other side. It could be an alligator. Who knows, right? So that's where, from a middle ground, I try to like think about it that way. And honestly, like, I tell people all the time, like I've been mostly in tech for the past 20 plus years, including my time, at Best Buy and things like that. And I've sat at all sides of the table, but if you would have said 20 years ago, I'd be able to say that. Like, I didn't know that, right? Like
Right.
you stack those experiences over time. And as you go through that and you learn and you grow, you start to identify the things you like, the things that run their course, and then what's next, right? Like, once I did sales and went back to college and then got the ad agency gig, I did ad agency life for almost a decade, got to a very senior position doing that, and then left that to go to Google and became a frontline salesperson, right? So same thing, amazing company, but it technically felt like another kind of a little bit of a down point, because I went from leading one of 4 digital directors across the organization at a major holding company to a frontline salesperson in a really big pool that is Google, right? And then working your way back up from that. So I just think about it that way. I think a lot of people focus too much on that like proverbial ladder climb, and it's all linear. I'm much more, what experiences can you stack that the culmination of those makes your overarching experiences and frankly skills like much more gratifying and interesting, if that makes sense.
You've spoken about the Sheryl Sandberg quote of a career is a jungle gym, not a ladder. I'm also reminded of David Epstein's book, Range, and this idea of a wide array of even changing careers, as you've done, can be more successful, right? I think it was Picasso who did 15 different careers before he started painting and then was only successful in his 30s and was very short-lived, fortunately. But the danger there is, it could have been that after I sold the cafe, the next 5 things were a flop. And so I built this habit of failure. What advice do you have for people wanting to build that bridge, wanting to make a change, and particularly in the world today where economic uncertainty, AI coming for jobs, automation, technology replacing human workforce in ways that certainly I've never seen in my lifetime, and I don't think we've ever seen in many generations. How do you do that, embracing this, non-traditional career ladder while also maintaining the safety, or at least, maybe it's a false sense of security of there is work to be done that I can get paid for, and hopefully not backtrack so far that I, roll down the mountain to the base?
Yeah. It's a great question. I mean, I think about this in a couple of ways. One, I always mentally orient myself around, and maybe don't say this in an interview per se, but like I always orient myself to number one, whatever it is you commit yourself to for 2 years. Like say that you signed a contract for yourself, I'm going to do this for 2 years, because 2 years is long enough to challenge yourself, make sure you're learning and growing from it. You're giving it enough runway to kind of fully see that through. Sure, if it was like a terrible, terrible decision, I'm not saying you can't like pull the ripcord and, parachute out of it. But generally speaking, say, if I'm going to say yes to this, I'm going to do this for 2 years and I'm going to give it all I got, right? Then as you get close to the end of that 2 years, start to map and plot, like, where am I? Am I still learning? Do I still feel challenged? Is it meeting whatever principles I want to apply to the work I do? And if the answers to those things are starting to become no, start giving yourself some time to like think about, at that 18-month mark, say, what are some other things I might want to do based on this experience, or what does next look like for me? And that might be different experiences, different skills you want to acquire, but those are in your control, right? Like, the things that are happening in the macroeconomic environment, maybe not always in your control. The things you're passionate about, the skills, the experiences, the experiments, things of that nature you want to do, and having a plan, that's in your control. And the reality is, like, most people just don't do that or have that until it's too late. And then they're trying to figure that out at a challenging time, right? Where maybe some things occurred where now they got to figure it out. So I think about, do the thing you're doing, do it really well for 2 years. What do you want to learn and kind of get out of that? And then start to think ahead of what's the next thing. And sometimes the answer might be, I love what I'm doing and there's unfinished business. I don't want to keep doing that. And then the answer is sign a 1-year extension for yourself. Say, I'm going to do this for a third year, right? I was at Google for almost 13 years. In that time, I had 6 roles. So the math works out, in terms of that 2-year mentality, but some of the roles were longer. I was a sales executive there for like 5 years. I was a sales leader for about 4 years. I was in enablement for like 5 years. So like the, different roles kind of throughout that process, but you can build a really healthy, long career, whether it's an organization, whether you're an entrepreneur, whatever it is. Just think in that term of like, if I do this for 2 years, what am I trying to get out of this? And then what else might I want next, right? So for example, when I moved from sales to sales enablement within Google, I had done a lot of incredible things on the sales side, both as a frontline salesperson and a sales leader. I said to myself, like, I think I can help the organization. I love sales. I can potentially like support and help the organization in a more meaningful and scalable way. And that's a big reason why I moved into enablement, to actually like support the global sales workforce on how they better show up for their customers and show up internally. So anyways, that's a drawn out way of answering that for you, but hopefully helpful for the audience.
Yeah, awesome. Let's go super broad for a minute. How old are your kids?
I have 3 boys who are 13, 10, and 7 as of the time of this recording.
Yes, indeed. December of 2025.
Yeah.
If they were to come to you and say, I don't like sales, I don't understand sales, right? Sales is slimy used car salesman. What's your answer, right? Because in the zeitgeist, there is so much antipathy for that kind of, maybe it's antiquated, maybe not, approach to selling. And to hear you say, I love sales in all of these different roles you've had, from Best Buy to now as a coach, what is your answer to that? How do you redefine sales in a way that you stand and say, this is a discipline that I embrace and I love?
Yeah, I love it. I mean, look, sales has all the stigmas and stereotypes and, all the used car salesperson and all that stuff. I don't look at sales that way when done properly, in my opinion. To me, sales is a helping profession. At the end of the day, if you are thinking about sales as a helping profession and you're truly oriented around how do I generate a benefit for the other side, sure, I get a benefit too, whatever that is, monetary, what have you. But if you orient it completely and fully on, I'm in a helping profession. My goal is to help you do something better or generate a benefit for yourself, for your organization, whatever that is. Then you can like wake up and sleep well every single day knowing you're doing something to help someone, right? And that's the way I've always thought about it, and I talk to my team about that all the time. I said, look, when you go make a recommendation, more times than you're going to fail more than you win, right? If you look at statistical data around average win rates for deals and building, having to build a 2x pipeline and all these other things, like you're going to lose a lot. But whenever there's a loss, I'm like, one, there's a lesson in it. And two, if you truly feel like you put something in front of someone that you believe fully will help them, you should still sleep well at night. Right. And that's really at the end of the day, the way I look at it is, I'm not a fan of selling something that I'm like, ooh, yes, I win, you lose. Right. It should really be like you feel very confident it's going to benefit them.
How are you thinking about helping your boys embrace, whether it's sales skills or just we can go to the root of it, a helping profession? How are you trying to teach them that ethos?
Yeah, I love that. So, I mean, a couple of things. One, we're all sellers, whether we like it or not. We all sell, right? My kids are great sales. Well, actually, they're very aggressive salespeople, but like we all sell. We're all trying to convince someone to do something for some reason. Right. So even if you don't have sales executive in your title, somewhere in your life, you're selling something, you're persuading, you're convincing, you're influencing someone to do something you want them to do for some reason. So, for my kids, I think about it mostly in how you show up when you do that. Right. Are you being helpful? Are you being kind? Like, are you being thoughtful of what the other side, wants or needs in the equation, not just like what you get out of it. Right. So, and the more you orient yourself around that mentality, to me, sales becomes a lot more gratifying. And frankly, like a lot more fun, right? When you believe in what you're, persuading, influencing, what have you, someone to do, that should feel much more fulfilling than pushing someone to do something because you want it, not them. Now, do kids do that? Oh yeah. Like kids do that a lot, right? So part of the lesson in the learning is how do you kind of think about those things in a way that it's not just about you? In fact, it should be very much less about you and it should be much more about someone else.
I'd be remiss if I didn't ask. Oh, yeah, I'm still here. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for an example of the ways in which one of your boys is a pushy salesman.
I mean, they ask for stuff all the time. Like, it's like constantly, the perfect example would be like bedtime, right? Like, just constantly, negotiating more time before they have to go to bed. Right. And, when they are firm in their stance around wanting more time, like my oldest will always be like, Dad, I'm 13. Like that's too early to go to bed. My friends don't go to bed that early, right? But like there's not a whole lot of social proof orientation around it other than him saying, well, my friends don't go to bed at this time. Why do I need to? But there's always like pushing that boundary line of convincing me, okay, fine, you could have 15 more minutes, right? At the end of the day, he made a sale. He just earned 15 more minutes. Do I like how he did it? No, not necessarily. But there's always like some sort of line they're trying to push and a boundary they're trying to cross. So they're selling to me every day, but they're hard to negotiate with for sure.
So that leads into a conversation about boundaries. The boundaries you hold with a customer or a prospect, a client, right? And maybe also we could start with, why does selling get such a bad reputation, given the ethos of Dan Pink's book, right? To Sell is Human, this idea that whether we are salesmen or not by identity, we are all selling to other people constantly. I'm trying to sell my dog on standing still while I comb for her for ticks.
Yeah.
So why does selling get a bad rap? What does that have to do with boundaries? And how do you, from a place of service and being useful, try to maintain boundaries to do away with that sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, the sales is a bad rap one is because sales gets a bad rap because it comes off as selfish, right? It's that simple. Like if you are selling from a selfish place, that's then you live in where sales gets a bad rap, right? And again, I'm not saying that you shouldn't get something, right? That you selling a widget or a service or whatever that is, that you don't get something out of that. But if you're coming at it purely for what you want and what you need, and actually like delivering, articulating it that way too, that's where sales gets a bad rap, right? So I think the more you can come from a selfless place, sure, in the background go, okay, if I know the value for them and the pain I'm solving and da da da, all those things, if I articulate that well and truly help them, this is what I will also receive. There's a mutual benefit. That's fine, right? But it's more the approach. And I think most salespeople just get way too caught up in what they're going to get out of it, and then that's what comes out of their mouth, right? Versus what the other side's going to get out of it, and in the background knowing, okay, if I deliver upon what I promised them, this is what I will get in return. In terms of like the boundaries, I think. Like anything else with sales, like we have to be very clear on value exchange, what they get, what we give, right? And, this can go both ways. Like if you are pushed too hard on the other side, then you have to set your own kind of rails, if you will, on, what's within range and what's not. So I think about this now, currently as an entrepreneur, a lot of the work I do requires specific, scope, right? Like I get a request and you've got to like scope those things out, and you can think about it a whole host of ways. What's the value I'm providing? What's the problem I'm solving? How much time is this going to take? All those things. But at the end of the day, both sides have to feel good about what I'm giving, what they're getting, but at the same time, what they're expecting from me, and then what I'm able to give as a result. So it's still a two-sided coin at the end of the day. And you have to be able to set the appropriate boundaries so that you don't get caught up in the same situation where you've kind of like oversold. You've given them the moon and the stars, and that you can't deliver on that.
Yeah. Let's go into a little bit of your work today. You're going to be coming on stage at the first inaugural Snafu conference alongside
looking forward to it.
Dear friend Marie, to talk about the work you do today and what it has to do with selling, right? The purpose of the Snafu conference is to bring sales tools to reluctant salespeople, to people who maybe don't self-identify as sales folks. Why did you get into coaching? What is coaching? And what are the parallels between coaching and selling?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So many parallels, and even more parallels as I went through this journey, which I'll share a little bit about, more parallels than I ever realized. So, I'll go back and reinforce one point I made, which is we are all sellers, whether we realize it or not. Absent of title, we're all selling something at some point to someone, right? For some reason, all those things. And when I think about the coaching side of this, so if I go back to when I transitioned from sales leadership into enablement at Google, part of that process was how do we better equip our sellers to have better conversation with their customers? And that out of that was born Google's global sales coaching program, which I created from the ground up, predicated heavily on leaning into coaching practice and feedback to help them better prepare for important conversation with customers. The power of coaching in sales, I think, is highly under-realized. In fact, I talk a lot about this being, in my opinion, the hidden advantage, if you will, especially for sales leaders, because the power of coaching, there's a lot of elements of what an effective salesperson and sales leader would do, which is you're incredibly curious. You're a great active listener. You're very present in the conversation, listening truly to what the other side has to say and hearing that, playing back observations, and then truly understanding how you can best support them, right? You're guiding them along to a co-created path and plan that delivers an outcome based on what's important to them. That is no different than what you should do in sales, right? So when you take sales as a craft and coaching as a craft and you put them together, it's incredibly powerful. And it made a huge difference for me even as a sales leader in the organization, because the more I got into a lens of coming at things with a place of curiosity, coming at things with a place of truly making sure I'm fully understanding all the different voices in it, regardless of what my opinion is, regardless of what my point of view is, and then evolving my thought process based on those inputs always got us to better outcomes, right? I reflect back on, as an example, a performance review I got once where someone said in the review, Jeff is often the first and last to speak in a meeting. And like, that was like it sticks with me. That was like many years ago, and it sticks with me because I thought about it and I was like, well, that's not like positive feedback. That's very constructive of like, hey, Jeff's like, his voice is just like very powerful. And I was in a very senior position. So the more I thought about that, I said, well, you're not being a coach-like leader in this situation. You're being a very focused person in this situation. How can you augment that to invite more voices? Marie knows this well. Not be the first to speak. Open up the curiosity lens, and then see what your point of view is on the other side as you actually like apply more of a coaching mindset. And every single time I would walk out at minimum with an evolved kind of point of view on things, and many times walking out going, you know what, I was wrong. Right. And you wouldn't know that if you didn't lens, right? That curiosity and what's most important. And in sales, that's what unlocks more interesting conversations. Because if you come in with your preconceived, assumed 50 slide pitch deck, whatever it is, and you only talk at your customer, you may have no idea what's actually going on for them. And maybe like the widget over here on the shelf that you decided to put in front of them that day was the wrong widget, right? It was actually this thing over here that would have created a much more interesting conversation.
Talk to me about, so in your work today, if you can describe what it is that you do, and I'm looking at Michael Bungay Steiner, The Coaching Habit, on my bookshelf opposite me. So what is it that you do? And then what was it like to land your first couple of clients?
Yeah. So what I do, so when I transitioned away from Google back in July of 2023 to start my own business, it's really a focus on taking the culmination of all my experiences, former buyer, former seller, former sales leader, former sales enablement leader, and executive coach, take all those experiences together, bring that support to more organizations. So I do that in a couple of ways. I do executive coaching for sales and revenue leaders so that I can help them coach them through situations, and in a lot of cases help them also become more coach-like so they can better support their teams. I run workshops and trainings in this space to help managers become more effective coaches for their teams and around certain sales skills, talks in that space, and then advisory work, oftentimes for sales and enablement orgs, to help them bring a lot of expertise to bear for their organization. So that's highest level order, some of those things come to life. And a big reason I made that transition was, going back to what we talked about, kind of the 2 years, and then are you learning? Are you growing? Are you feeling challenged? I felt this pull for more people with all the things I've kind of learned and at more scale. And that's where, the decision for me came from to really, at minimum, answer that question for myself. Is this something I can do successfully and go support more organizations? So we're about 2.5 years into that journey, and I've learned a lot so far. That's for sure.
I've had a lot of friends, none of them self-described entrepreneurs, come into, whether it's freelancing or consulting, or I'm thinking of a lot of folks who've become FMTs, family and marriage therapists specifically. And it's been really interesting to observe a dichotomy between those who build very quickly, very successful, thriving practices and those that don't. Like, there are a handful of people in my life who've just walked into a new career where they are responsible for supporting the clients through, life skills and tools they've developed and training, certifications, who just have an abundance of clients. And then those who have the, equivalent set of certifications and trainings who really struggle or are not able to get clients. What's that difference?
The one word answer to that difference, in my opinion, is sales. If you want to move in an entrepreneur space, and by the way, I would have never, I mean, whatever, call me an entrepreneur or not. Like if someone said to me 5 years ago, you're going to run your own practice one day, you're going to be an entrepreneur, blah, 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 I would have said, you're crazy. Like not interested in doing that. And also who knows what the future holds. I'm not a corporate versus entrepreneur person. I think both have their pros and cons, right? But I think the biggest piece of that is sales, right? Because unfortunately you don't get to, in most cases, decide I'm going to run a business doing X thing, and then the business just arrives at your door, right? It does come down to your connections, your network, your willingness to put yourself out there, your willingness to fail a lot, right? To get a lot of rejection and no's and learn and iterate along the way, and also have a very clear strategy and ICP, if you will. Like, who am I? What's my brand? Who do I best support? How do I best support them? What's the value I bring by supporting them? And then what's the credibility that sits underneath that I'm the right person or organization to do that for those prospects and customers, right? That's when the business can really, over time thrive. But, I would say even for me, like, was this business, like people talk about like, oh, this business was an overnight success. Like, I don't believe in that. Like, that's BS. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happened in the background that just didn't get all flashed and shown off on LinkedIn or YouTube or whatever to get you there, right? I wouldn't have been able to even start this business if it weren't for all the time I spent in agency world and at Google and things of that nature. Like, those experiences had to happen in order for me to even give this a try. But it always comes back again to sales. To me, is something that every person and profession needs, especially now, to be able to generate the things that you want to generate in work and in life. So that would be to me that at its core is sales.
One of my mentors is BJ Fogg of Stanford's Behavior Change Lab, and he told me, I don't know, back in 2013 or 14, don't try to persuade the unpersuadable. Instead, find the people who already want what you are offering and make it easy for them, or make it easier for them.
Yeah.
I think a lot about that, whether we're talking about books or coaching or my day job at Zander Media, right? Helping organizations figure out their narrative and then turn it into media, is when you've got a potential salesperson, somebody who's an entrepreneur, somebody who is starting a coaching practice and wants to build that practice, but they don't want to sell. What do you do with that? How do you help them? Not to put you on the spot. I think
no, I mean, it's just giving me a blunt reaction, which is, this might sound a little harsh, but there's a lot of coaches out there, right? There's a lot of people who want to be coaches, and I admire the profession. It's a big reason why, it changed going through training and coaching, everything like that has been like life-changing for me in so many ways. But the reality is, there's so many of them out there. It's a very crowded space. Like, if you're not comfortable creating a clear kind of brand around yourself, the value you provide, who your ICP is, and then really like selling that, it's going to be hard. It just is, right? Some may succeed through word of mouth and referrals and then generate, create a snowball effect from that. And a lot of them do, as based on that kind of strategy. But if you're not willing to employ sales or outsource some sales and marketing to take that off your plate and say, that's just not my jam, I'm going to find a trusted partner to help me do that, then that's an approach you could take. In terms of me helping in that space, like, I think of it, I'm not the coach. I don't go to market as the coach for coaches, right? I'm happy to coach a coach, but I'm not a business coach for coaches, if that makes sense. So I would lean more in the advice space and say, you have to think about, how am I going to get my message out there, find the right people to sell what I'm offering, and be very clear on the value it's going to provide. So going back to your point, I'm selling to the people who actually want what I have to offer. Now, whether you're doing that individually or whether you feel like you need someone to help you do that, that's a different question for them to answer.
You've been running your practice for the last couple of years, and before you made the transition from Google into this world of entrepreneurship, and I'm going to say you are indisputably now an entrepreneur. Welcome to the party. You wrote December 18, 2023 on your vision board. Why did that date matter to you?
Yeah. So, and by the way, that vision board's still right here. So it like stares me in the face, and I've added things to it and all that good stuff. December 18, 2023 is my 45th birthday. I picked that date more so to like hold myself accountable to make a decision. So on the back of the vision board, there's certain milestones, things I had to check off, get my coaching certification, things of that nature. And I really just wanted it to be a point to say, okay, like, where do you want to go now? What's next? And that could have been, I was still at Google at the time. It could have been, keep doing what you're doing at Google. It's awesome. You're learning things, what have you. Or it could have been, it's time. It's time to transition. It's time to move into the next stage. Ironically, I didn't make the decision on December 18th, 2023. My last day at Google, based on the decision I was making at that time, was July 7th of 2023. And part of that was just my own kind of inner voice telling me, all the milestones on the back of that vision board were checked, complete. And for me, many days, my voice just kept saying, it's time, right? And, we talk all the time about like, are you ready? What does it take to be ready? I built my bridge. My bridge was built. Did I know everything that was going to be on the other side of it? Of course not. You don't know everything until you actually get to the other side, look around, see the scenery and all those things, and start to kind of work your way through it. But, it didn't feel, I didn't want to force myself to a date on a vision board that was set as a accountability date. And again, my 45th birthday, put that for what it is. But I had to, say like, do you need to wait till 12/18/2023? Or do you do it sooner?
What were some of the decisions back to boundaries? And I think boundaries is such an interesting element and maybe an under-discussed element in sales. What were some of the boundaries that moving out of, a role at Google that many people in the world would aspire to working for yourself and all of the uncertainty that entrepreneurship brings? What were the distinctions and the boundaries and the opportunities that you were considering?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest boundary, if you will, was increasing my presence with my kids was my number one. I was running a global team in a global role, emails, pings, messages flying around 24/7 nearly, right? I had people reporting to me in Singapore, Dublin, London, San Francisco, New York, LA, like all over the place. And, there was this element of me that felt like I could still do something very impactful by transitioning and running my own business in this space, but also have my own sense of boundary in terms of the hours I wanted to work, which days I want to work, which clients I want to work with. And granted, I don't get to make all those choices, but I do, I do have more control, if you will, over the boundaries I want to set for myself. And, that was probably the biggest piece for me was really around my kids. And I remember the thing that solidified my decision at the time was talking to a fellow coach at a conference and was writing down kind of my pro con list of like, it literally said to shift, not to shift, because my company name's the Shift Coaching and Consulting. And I remember the main thing I wrote on the to shift side of it was they get their dad back. And I like starred it and circled it. And I was like, that's it. Like the decision's made.
Yeah. Amazing. On the topic of your kids and the uncertainty that we are living through, and perhaps unfortunately, I think we are going to see more of through the rest of this decade, not less. If you disagree, feel free to speak to that. But with AI and automation and technology, what are the skills? And of course, sales, I would imagine, is one of them. But what are the skills that, given more time with your boys, you're wanting to teach them, you're helping them to apply as they're, heading into middle school and high school, and maybe even starting to think about college at 13, trying to remember if that's like right on the cusp of starting to think about.
A couple of years away, he's in 7th grade. Yeah.
What's your outlook for your boys, given the uncertainty in the world, and what are you doing to prepare them against that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I mean, I'll put aside for a moment, we could talk about AI all day. So like the box of check, do they need to learn AI, understand AI, live with AI, all that stuff? Yes, yes, and yes. And at their ages, they will probably get better with all of that technology in a very fast time, more so than I ever will. Right. So for that, I feel good based on their ages that they'll like embrace the technology and learn things that I probably would have a harder time learning. But I do think there's also an increased element of like the human side of this, right? Yes, there's what professions will exist, not exist, be impacted by AI. There's that piece for sure. But then there's also, again, going back to what we've talked about, even with sales, is like, what's the human side of this equation that helps set them up to build a strong network, build, credibility in the work that they're going to do, whatever that work may be, and leverage a lot of the skills that you would find in sales to help them really like navigate those next steps. So, that's, I think the most important thing is we talk a lot about AI and the amazing things it can do, but I think we lose sight a little bit of like the heightened importance of the human side of things when technology is going to replace a lot of things that either really like we couldn't have done at the same scale anyways, or could have never done at all, right? Like I use AI multiple times a day. Like there's just things it does that I couldn't have done anyways. I think about it more so from like, how can it be additive to life, complementary and additive to what you're doing? Embrace it. If you're going to sit in a space of fear, you're going to put yourself at risk of failure. You just got to lean into what it is, acknowledge it for what it is, and then say, okay, what can AI deliver that I can't? And then what's the space I can play in?
One of the reasons I was inspired to start the Snafu conference, in addition to the fact that this is just a discipline, the study of sales, and particularly applied for non-salespeople, something that I don't consider myself an expert in, but want to learn for the next, at least the next decade, right? But yeah, for the rest of my life. It's something I've applied for a long time. And for the last several years, I've been applying very deliberately. But also, I keep coming back to this question of, okay, if technology is enabling things to move so quickly, what are the innately human skills that are never going away, or at least I don't think going away in my lifetime? Maybe our grandchildren will. I'm a little bit younger than you. I'm turning 40 in 6 months, which is wild. Our grandchildren may date robots. And I don't mean, a ChatGPT relationship. I mean, like there may be that, like, they are, cyborgs dating cyborgs. I don't know. But in my lifetime, the utility of humans gathering in person is increasingly important, right? Amidst loneliness, amidst disconnection, amidst Zoom calls, people gathering is essential. And so how can I learn about non-sales selling? Well, I can bring people together around this topic and bring people like you and Marie and many others to stage to share a lifetime's worth of experience from each on elements of this topic. Right. Yeah. And that is not going to change. The way I often say it is the value of sitting at Homer's feet and listening to him recite the Iliad is never going away. Story, community, mutual learning, right? Learning from others' stories and others' experience.
Yeah, for sure. It just goes back to the things that make us like truly human. the other thing I think about a lot, especially in the coaching space, like, look, the coaching space is being disrupted. Like there's AI coaches and things of that nature out there too, right? Or people talk to ChatGPT or talk to Gemini to get advice on things or get coaching on things. So we just need to acknowledge that for what it is. What it cannot replace is lived experiences, right? So I think about this as, I'll go to a ChatGPT or Gemini to like work through things to a certain level, and then I have to like remind myself this is a piece of technology giving you direction on potentially a very important decision. Now you may need to employ a human element, right? Whether it's doing your taxes, investment strategy, if you're a CEO making a really important decision for the direction of your business. My guess is at those levels, I'm not saying nobody would use those tools for the decision, but usually like when you get to that decision point, you may want to lean on people still who have the lived experience. They've done what you've done before. They have a skill set where you can say, okay, now I'm talking to someone who's like carried the bag, been the CEO, is an effective coach, whatever that might be, to then help move you forward to whatever decision or path you want to take. So I always remind a lot of coaches of that as I say, look, like even AI coaching, it brings scale to something. We're not scalable people. I can't coach thousands of people, right? Like I don't have time to do that. So it's amazing that there's technology out there that can allow access to coaching and democratize it for everybody. Right. But then there's going to be certain types. You go back to the easy yes people or the easier yes people. There's people out there that are going to look for someone like me or another coach like me to say, hey, AI can only take me so far, or I run a multi-billion-dollar multinational business. Like ChatGPT cannot be what makes this decision for me. Right. So there's always that kind of space for it. And like anything else, we just have to adapt and evolve, and we will, right? Like we adapted and evolved when the calculator came out. We adapted and evolved when the internet came out. We adapted and evolved when smartphones came out. We'll adapt and evolve again.
In the time we have left, I have sort of two different domains I'd like to explore. We'll come to books and resources that you recommend. But before we do that, what advice do you have for coaches learning to sell, and also for salespeople who you believe, and I also believe, should incorporate more coaching or coaching habits, to quote MBS, Michael Bungay-Steiner, into their practice?
Yeah. Yep. So I'll start with coaches. Here's the good news for you coaches listening to this. You have the skills that I believe salespeople need, the coach-like skills of curiosity, of active listening, of presence, of being able to take that information to then play back observation, uncover pain points, uncover challenges, uncover potential value. That is selling, right? If you can utilize your coaching skills and reorient them into the superpower that they are for selling, you already have the skills. You just have to have the comfort level to say, how do I utilize those skills in a way to also generate business? But again, going back to what I said at the beginning, it's leverage it as a helping profession. Coaching is a helping profession. Sales done well is a helping profession. So if you use your coaching skills to sell, you're still helping. So that would be my advice and direction to coaches. Use those coaching skills. They will help you sell. For salespeople, I would encourage you to consider learning how to coach, because if you learn how to coach, then you heighten the skills that are required of a really great salesperson, which again, curiosity, empathy, active listening, problem identification, observation, shared and co-created paths forward to get to a beneficial outcome for the customer. And then ideally you get them what they need, you get what you need as well. So sellers, learn how to coach. Coaches, use your coaching skills to sell.
Great. Very succinct. Thank you.
Yeah.
What resources, and maybe we could go with like some of your favorite classical sales books, right? And then we can go to some others. So for example, another book that I can see just barely over my monitor is Setting the Table by Danny Mayer. I have sort of the next follow on from that on my desk here, which is Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. But Setting the Table, I gave to every single employee who came through, even if they only stayed with us for 2 days at Robin's Cafe, which maybe I would do differently now because that was a lot of employees. But I just so firmly believed in this idea of setting the table, of creating unreasonable hospitality, creating an environment where the business existed to serve my employees such that my employees felt cared for and had the space to care for our customers. So that being an example of a non-classical sales book that is truly, in my opinion, about selling. So books for salespeople that you often recommend, and then non-sales books that you think are fantastic.
So I'm gonna give a honest admission and say I'm not a book aficionado in that sense. So the second thing I'm going to say is going to sound really weird from someone who just said that, which is, as I've done research on this, especially for the sales side, I think there's a gap in terms of properly a good book for a sales leader, especially to read, to understand how to unlock like the full power of coaching and sales. So I am in early exploration of actually writing that book myself. Early title is The Leadership, The Power of Coaching and Sales. We'll see where it emerges from this recording to how long that process takes. But as I thought about that process, I do read books. I'm more of an audiobook person. But I would say, this to me, there's a gap here, right? And I think that's why the pervasive problem kind of exists and why sales gets the rap, if you will, that it does, because we leaders, especially in sales positions and sellers, still tend to default to what's in it for me, talking about themselves, directing and reacting versus coaching and guiding and empowering. And to me, there's not like that perfect resource out there to deliver that. So I'm hoping to be the person to deliver that message at some point in the near future. We'll see. But beyond that, I'm a big like micro reader, right? Like I think about like what are some simple little pieces that you can kind of read and write on this. And there's a lot of, great resources just focused on coaching alone that I think could apply nicely to a sales audience in the interim, if you will.
Where can we go to find some of those micro resources?
So I would suggest, I went through the Hudson Institute of Coaching for my coaching certification. Pam McLean, one book that really stuck with me was Self as Coach, Self as Leader is a great book that she wrote. But there's some good resources from the Hudson Institute as one example from the coaching side of it. And then hopefully in the near future, the other resource will be my book, but TBD on that.
Great.
So
offline, we'll talk more about book positioning and book selling, because that's something I think a lot about and care a lot about.
Awesome.
Very good. Any last takeaways for listeners and viewers? Anything that you would like to impart?
Well, first and foremost, I thank you for those who listened, watched, for spending the time with us. I hope it was helpful. My biggest thing I would just say is like, for those listening, I assume you have some sort of interest in sales, whether you're a seller or not. I would just remind you, like, we are all sellers, right? And whether we're convincing someone to do something for some reason, for some value that we believe we or they get out of it as a result. So I think if we can reorient ourselves around that and stop thinking about it just as a profession, and it's more of like a way of being and a skill set that I believe truly all of us need, especially in today's environment, job market, what have you, would be the one piece. And I would just say there's incredible power in coaching in terms of how you become a more effective seller, and then also for coaches utilizing that power to be more successful in selling for yourself.
Yeah, I think one of my takeaways from this conversation, in the same way that I think everyone should get some experience with customer service and some experience with selling Cutco knives or pumpkins at Robin's Pumpkin Patch, whatever it is, everyone can coach. You don't have to go through Hudson or a coaching certification or, multiple years of study in order to ask people kind, generous questions to support them discovering their own answers. And that is a skill that everyone would benefit from fostering further. Absolutely. Absolutely. If you can orient around your next conversation, think to yourself, just say, it's not about me, right? Maybe next time I'll interview Robin. It'll be all about Robin. But like, bring that curiosity to the table and truly orient everything on what matters to the other person. Jeff, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate it. Thanks for listening to Snafu. I'm Robin Zander. I hope you enjoyed this last interview. One quick thing before you leave, and that is the Snafu newsletter. It comes out each weekend, written by me, a short article on a sales skill or non-sales selling skill that you can apply right now. some homework, and 3 things I've loved this week. Go to joinsnafu.com and just join the newsletter at the top of the website. See you next time.